Anything we do repeatedly, we get better at. Now, that's why athletes perform a hit, a kick, a serve, or whatever it might be over and over and over again, because you're neurally wiring your nervous system to do that on game day. It is the same. We are always becoming more something, always becoming more something. And it's not just weeks and months, it's decades that can pass. And suddenly you realize, crikey, I've been doing that for a long time. Did I choose it? And so spirituality, and what I talk about in the book, is actually practicing your spirituality means actually perhaps even taking one pillar, forgiveness today, patience tomorrow, gratitude the next day, whatever it might be. And choosing today, it's gratitude. Okay, I'm going to actually proactively, consciously practice that gratitude or forgiveness or whatever it might be. So it is actually building more of that muscle and actually becoming it more. But it does mean a very conscious effort to do it.
Susanna Healy, you are very, very welcome to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm almost terrified to tell people what we might talk about here, because I'm just thinking of if someone who either listens to the show or randomly turns on to the Inner Entrepreneur podcast and thinks we're going to talk about business, and maybe we're not going to talk about business today. And how I came across you, we were passing time in the bookshop, and I came across this book, and the 7-Day Soul by Susanna Healy, which is you, obviously. And I just picked it up and it appealed to me, and I started reading about any. So the 7-Day Soul, a pathway to flourishing spirituality in everyday part of your life. So please don't hang up the podcast just yet. There may be some value in this. So, I mean, there's so many questions come out of this, but I suppose when you talk about flourishing spirituality, and the first question that comes to my mind is, how do you define spirituality? Is that the first question everyone asks?
Yes, it is. Yeah. And I almost feel, I often feel exactly the way you did there a second ago, and going, wait, just give it a second before don't go just because I mentioned the word spirituality, because a lot of people you kind of feel are going to be gone instantly. Listen, I try to be really inclusive in my definition. I don't actually have one, I suppose, in terms of spirituality. All I would say is that it's living life in relation to something larger than ourselves, something bigger than ourselves, something beyond our outlines. Now, that for some people could be their kids, their family life, nature, the planet, or a higher being, God or otherwise, or beings. So all things. But it is living relation to something more than the visible world. That's what I would say. But it is also But I think an important aspect of it is connecting our deepest, innermost self with that outward thing. So it's a connection of both what's deeply inside us and then actually expanding to something much bigger than ourselves. That's how I define it. So when I talk about spirituality, and I really try to be as inclusive as possible now in everything, you'll get people who lovely messages on books, and in that book, lovely messages saying, "Oh my goodness, it's a keeper for life. I keep it on my bedside drawer," all the rest of it. And you other people who are saying, "Oh, that's not my idea of spirituality." And you just can't win sometimes. But I really tried to be as inclusive as I could, because I also felt that it had to, or I wanted it to. The book, The 7-Day Soul, was about in relation to health. And that was, I think, what kind of my publisher liked as well. It's that idea that actually it's good for us, and we can talk about that if you want to in a little while, but that actually it is a dimension of well-being. And I think that was an important point. So it has to be personal to the individual and the reader, but at the same time, it is, as I used to say, kind of for so long, we've considered spirituality to be a deeply personal and therefore a private matter. But there's now so much research to say that spirituality is good for us, that it is no longer a private matter. It's a matter of public health. So I don't know if that's a rambling way of answering your question, but I think that's really important. It's a matter of public health.
I do remember that day standing in the bookshop in Kilkenny, looking at lots of books and picking this up, and as people do, you read the first couple of lines of the first page or so while you're standing there to see if it connects with you. And I will admit to not being a religious person. I will admit to, at times in my life, having been anti-religious. But the opening page in the book, there was a story I think of you being in a meditation retreat led by a
Catholic nun. Yes.
Catholic,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Catholic nun. And I love the fact, it was interesting that you challenged her that she didn't mention,
Yeah.
Christian
Yeah. We were
mysticism.
surrounded by Buddhas. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes. And by the way, if you walk in through my front door, you'll be surrounded by Buddhas also. But I like that idea that she was more, when I put her up for that, she wanted people to engage with their spirituality. She wasn't interested in selling them Catholicism. I'm sure it was for sale if they wanted to buy it, but her interest was your version of Catholicism. So that sounds like what you're saying. We need that connection inside. And whether that's through Christ, Buddha, whatever, is not so much important as we need this sense of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved it because it was, I think the story did not show me up well at the time. And it's my own immaturity in terms of spiritual development at the time, I think. But it was that sense of, she wasn't interested in, as you say, in selling anything. It was just connecting people to a sense that absolutely, and that's where when we talk about spiritual education and spiritual development, you go from the kind of tribalism of, well, this is what we should believe in. This is the answer. This is the explanation. This is the history, or whatever it might be. And that's not just in Christianity. That's in all the world faiths, and also in the non-faith traditions. People can be very pedantic about, even anti-religion can become a religion of its own. Absolutely, and very pedantic. But a step above that is beginning to connect and to realize we're heading towards something that's actually languageless and wordless. And it is where language can divide us a lot. And when we begin to just feel something, then you know that you're connecting more into a kind of a common humanity and a better sense of a better version of humanity, I think, that is wordless, as I say, languageless, and begins to connect everybody so you don't have in and out groups. And that's where I think it's a kind of a very much a state of mind. It's not a belief system. It's a state of mind, actually, that you can come in and out of a lot of the time. But that, to me, is the kind of more, and even from the research, what they would say is the kind of more mature stages of faith development.
It's interesting because I've been interested in meditation since I was about, late teens, which at this stage is 40 years ago. So it's a long time. And over those 40 years, I've studied meditation with a lot of people. I've been to India and learned lots of different practices. But I certainly have come across a number of people who are pedantic about how it should be practiced. And I remember being in Ireland in a meditation event once, and a young lady correcting how I was sitting, and I'm thinking to myself, in my view, maybe it's my prejudice, is like, if I stand in my head, it makes no difference. To me, meditation, for me, is that moment when I connect with something, whatever you call it, when I connect with something. And in that moment of connection, I can feel that I could be mowing the lawn in that state. I could be having my hair cut, and there may well be a better way to sit. But again, what that came out to me is she had been trained in a set of rules of how we do this, but I felt was missing the point slightly.
Yeah. I mean, I know I've had the same kind of thing of people saying to me, because people would look upon me and kind of say, well, you seem to be still religious or whatever. And I'm a mess of kind of belief and unbelief. Every time I come back to my faith, a Catholic faith, I know I just work better. And yet there's lots of, I am so a la carte. There are some things that I absolutely, that sometimes when I've had these discussions with people and they've kind of said, so you're not even Christian. Because some of the stuff I don't really believe in. But I believe in that deep sense of something much, much greater than me that I call God. And I know that life works better for me when I go back to that. I don't mind if somebody else calls it. I mean, I'm in groups and psychology groups and whatever that where we talk about it as consciousness or higher consciousness, or benevolent consciousness, and sometimes it's just consciousness, not benevolent. So that's another interesting discussion, and I can perfectly, totally comfortably sit in those conversations, because to me that's just words, but we're actually tapping into the same kind of thing. And yet I know that people, I had an example of something like you did as well, that, I was at a different tradition meditation retreat training, but they were talking about forgiveness, but it was kind of forgiving somebody else. But I kind of noticed that it was still quite self-serving, and it was kind of pray or wish other people well so that they'll stop annoying you, as opposed to actually just utterly, which is the higher level,
forgiving them
just
completely,
wish them well and wish them better things for their betterment. So listen, we're all just learning, is the honest truth. It's rather than kind of picking holes in each other or anybody's faith or non-faith or whatever. We're all just learning.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I say there was a time in my life when I was anti-religious, but I was raised Catholic. Catholic Irish boy. That was absolutely. Probably in my early teens, as I discovered meditation or whatever, I moved away from it. I realized Catholicism wasn't for me, Christianity wasn't for me. But I didn't move to something else. I thought, well, none of it's for me. Meditation answers that need in me, and I don't even need to be part of an organized religion. But I suppose maybe the mellowing in me as I get older, when you say your faith, you find yourself at home there and it nourishes you. My instinct is, well, then that's where you should be. And whether you were, no matter what that faith was, assuming it's a faith that's not harming other people, as long as that's a faith that's practiced that's, not harming anyone else, then my answer is, well, then you found the place to be, and why would you go anywhere else? But also, why would I then try and sell to you that I've found a better solution? Because, I don't know what your life experience is. You don't know mine. So why would I go, oh, no, Susanna, you're wrong. You need to dump Catholicism and do what I do. And that's where the world is, and maybe has been in some places. And that's kind of a shame, because we are all very different. I don't expect you will like the same music as I will. But we can share a love for music.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I want to say, because I do think there is, in this spirituality world or discussion, particularly in Ireland, there is a kind of an anti-Catholicism. I think people would be less disrespectful to other faith traditions and very inclusive.
Yeah.
I think because most of us were raised in it, that we feel it's our own to trash kind of thing.
Yeah. Like your family, you wouldn't speak to people outside your family.
Yeah, good example, exactly. And that's, I do feel a little bit, now I want to speak out on that. I do feel like now that is something we do need to tackle a little, so that inclusive means everybody, absolutely everybody. Unless they, a harm or obviously or something like that, but it does mean everybody. And I think that includes Catholicism. So that is where it does irritate me a little bit, that people feel they're not allowed to say that they have perhaps very strong Catholic beliefs. The other thing that I think was lacking in our education, Paul, is there's the cataphatic and apophatic ways of experiencing your faith. And we were always taught when we were young.
So I don't understand either of those
I'll
words.
explain them. But we were kind of taught, they're very theological. I didn't hear about them until I started researching for my book.
But it makes you sound smart.
I'd never heard about them before until I looked into them. But it really kind of landed with me, because one is the more, and listen, apologies to people with much more training than who kind of can explain this much better. But one is a kind of more literal, much more language-based, kind of believe in this and that and creeds, etc. The apophatic is much more abstract, much more experiential, less language-based, indescribable kind of thing. But that is where all the world faiths and the non-faiths meet in an experiential kind of thing.
Because the mystic,
And that is where we never were taught. Like, were you taught meditation or prayer as being a meditation? Were you ever taught to sit in total silence? That's my prayer. I just sit in silence.
Well, I will tell you how I got introduced to meditation. I went to a Christian Brothers school It's funny. I talked, if I speak to my sons or people there and talk about Christian Brothers schools, they no longer seem to remember what a Christian Brothers school was. But men of my age, we all went to Christian Brothers schools. But when I was maybe, close to my leaving cert, so maybe I was 17 years of age or something, and we arrived in one morning, and the our class was 45 minutes long. Our teacher, it was lay teachers and Christian Brothers. Our teacher hadn't arrived. And so 15 minutes class of, 30 boys, it was chaos. And a young Christian brother, relatively new to the school, burst into the class and yelled at us to be quiet. Now, anyone who knows anything about Christian Brothers knows when they yell at you to be quiet,
Pay attention.
you shut up. So we just thought we're in for trouble now. We're in for punishment now. But he tells us all to sit down quietly and to close our eyes. And he led the class through a meditation for about 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, if you'd asked me, Paul, what is meditation? I would have said, we didn't have the internet, 40 years ago. I didn't know what it was. He led this meditation, and it's one of the most profound experiences of my life. So much so that when whatever I experienced was incredible. And then when I left class that day, I went about finding out what was it I had experienced and how do I spend the rest of my life experiencing this. And I have probably meditated every day for the past 40 years, bar one or two. It's been a huge interest to me, but it was because of the experience in that moment. He never spoke to us about it, but that experience, but I was never taught meditation.
Well, I never had that experience, actually. And it wasn't that we were taught really holy. In fairness, the few nuns that taught us, mostly they were lay, but the few nuns that taught us were very, highly educated, intelligent women, but they weren't throwing it, shoving it down our throats at all. So that was a really life-changing experience you had.
Oh, in all our lives, there's one or two moments, but that literally is a moment where my life moved on to a track. And if you look at where my life is today, I mean, without a huge interest in meditation in the inner world, would I be hosting a podcast called The Inner Entrepreneur? I wouldn't. I'd be in maybe deeper into the world of how can you scale your business? We're now at a point of going, sure, scale your business, but if you're not looking after the inner world, there is nothing in the outer world. But just as we're talking about the Christian Brothers, you may have seen a program on TV about 3 months ago or so about some of the brutality in the Christian Brothers schools. I don't know if you saw the program. It was, and they interviewed some of them a little older than me, but I sat watching that with my wife about 3 months ago one evening. So it went through the brutality in the Christian Brothers schools, and it was horrendous. And I found it difficult to watch because I remember it, because I didn't experience it to the degree that it was horrible to watch. But I got the letter. People won't know what that is. It's a piece of leather, a strap that the brothers would beat you with. I was beaten with a strap often enough. There was enough physical abuse in the school for me to be shaken watching that show. But I'm very sad for the people who'd experienced a lot more abuse. But the reason that I relay that is because I hear what you say about us beating up on the Catholic Church, but to some degree, they are the authors of their own doom. Now, I suppose where I would land in it is that I also had an incredibly life-changing, positive experience with two Christian brothers, and I experienced guys who were brutal men. So I don't tear all the same brush.
Absolutely, and it's to just and it's to allow. It's more the kind of believers that I'm talking about there. I mean, in terms of the hierarchy and that kind of thing, obviously, and then there was the kind of cover-ups and all the rest of it. So it's not defending that at all. Yeah. I'm just talking about people who have a belief. Whereas the kind of, whereas all that went on, it doesn't affect their belief in God.
Because it's a separate thing.
Separate things. And they must be allowed to feel free as opposed to frightened or cliched or kind of say, oh, you're so out of date, you're so out, we've moved on from that kind of thing. That's not right.
No, and that's the same as the meditation instructor saying, no, our type of meditation is better. Because it's a bit like arguing what's the best road to Dublin. It's the road you want to drive. You'll end up in Dublin 2 or 3 hours later. Anyway, that's kind of what we're saying. I'm a personal development addict, and I've probably done all over the world not every, but most of Tony Robbins' courses. Long times I've done them, but I did all of them. But I remember probably 20 years ago or so, hearing him talking about spirituality in business. It really struck me at the time. And he said, building a business, being an entrepreneur is one of the most spiritual things you can do. And it struck me. And I believe it to be true because entrepreneurship is fundamentally a creative act. It's creating something you want in your life. It's creating the life you want. It's creating all of these things. It's creating something out of nothing because you're usually starting with an idea. You're building something that doesn't exist. You're building a life yourself that doesn't exist. And that is spirituality.
Totally. And it is so funny you're saying this, Paul, but maybe not so coincidental, because I was thinking about, I do loads of workshops for a workplace and whatever on resilience and that kind of thing, various different psychology topics, but one of them being resilience. But we're always kind of talking about balance, rest, and whatever. When I am at my best, when I am truest to myself, balance probably goes out the window, but I find an energy source that is utterly self-perpetuating when I am passionate about something. When I am on, I've just gone hooked. For example, when I'm writing my books. So the 7-Day Soul is my second. But when I want to say something, it's itching. I remember my brother once when I was in the middle of writing the 7-Day Soul, and there was one time when he kind of said, Sue, you're wrecked. You've too much on. Would you not just give the book a rest, or just let it go? And I said, put it this way. If I had 6 months to live, I'd just write faster. Now, I don't want to disrespect people who might be in awful such circumstances. I don't mean that literally. But just in terms,
but that's important.
That's how important it was to me. I just felt this is something that I want to say in the world. And it's utterly coming from me. And it was absolute passion. I mean, I was writing, kind of up at 4:45 in the morning and writing at nighttime and nonstop. But it was utterly me. It was this self-fulfilling energy that I got. And I think that's what you're talking about in entrepreneurship. I'm kind of working now in my new project as well. And again, it's just something that I never stop thinking about. Does it wear me out? No. I thinking about it when I'm washing up. I thinking about it when I'm washing the clothes. This morning, I was thinking when I'm walking the dog, when I'm working, driving, everything. It's all encompassing. And it is utterly true to myself. And I think if we could get more people, that's where you will find, you won't need resilience. You won't need it because you will find your passion and your drive. Well, if you can look to, for I think probably you and I, it's perhaps entrepreneurship. For somebody else, it might be doing a sport or exercise well or whatever it might be. I noticed that isn't Johnny Sexton, the Irish rugby player, he's, one of the most top world sports athletes, ever probably in his field. And he called his book Obsessed. And if you look a lot of the autobiographies, the biographical accounts, on Netflix at the moment of the Arnold Schwarzeneggers and the various different people like that, they were obsessed. And that is where something that's inside naturally energizes you. And that's spirituality. That is allowing what's really you to come out.
Obsessed is maybe a dark word, but I certainly over the years have studied successful people and had a great interest in it. But that is the common trait. It's very difficult to be successful in anything if you're not to some degree obsessed with it. Because here's the fact, you will be competing with other people. And if you're not obsessed with it, then you're not going to step ahead. That's just the way it is.
Yeah, it's a passion, know, and it when it kind of, it doesn't have to overtake you like that. But I think it's really interesting that I notice that in the people who become top at what they do as well, it's an all-encompassing passion, both in their time, but I think also in their mental energy. Physical, but also mental energy. And that is where you could kind of say that is in itself a spirituality.
It is. And, partly what I'm thinking about the person driving along in their car and they own a business or entrepreneur or not, they're just interested and they're listening to this topic and we're talking about spirituality, and they're thinking, okay, I have payroll, I need to have customers. My wife's wondering why I'm not home till 7 p.m. She wants me to collect the kids from the football match. All these sort of things are going on. What the hell do I want to listen to a conversation about spirituality for?
Yeah, and I think, there are different dimensions to spirituality as well. But spirituality isn't what I think what we have mistaken spirituality for in the past is that it is the yoga mat or the prayer mat or, a religious ceremony or births, deaths and marriages kind of thing, the hatch, match and dispatch variety of spirituality. Yeah. Where spirituality is about how we do what we're doing, payroll or whatever it might be. And again, if you bring it back to, well, because we kind of, as they say, we live our lives forwards, but understand it backwards. And if you take from a kind of, well, what do I want my life to have stood for? What values do I want to permeate it through life? It isn't about, I believe in honesty, I believe in this, that, and the other. It's that maybe you're a little bit more compassionate in payroll to somebody who's out sick or long-term sick leave or whatever it might be. That's where values hit the ground and are actually, that's where spirituality is. It's kind of, it's living it. It's living kind of being less, I always use the example of traffic or whatever it might be, but that something is a little bit more compassionate, that you are practicing one of the values that you believe in, whether it's forgiveness, love. Love is all-encompassing of forgiveness and kindness and patience and various different things. And actually practicing them, because I do talk about that in the book. I talk about practicing the pillars and whatever pillars you want to choose for your spirituality. But if you believe in them, then you should really be practicing them as in getting better at them by repetition. Anything we do repeatedly, we get better at. Now, that's why athletes perform a hit, a kick, a serve, or whatever it might be over and over and over again, because you're neurally wiring your nervous system to do that on game day. It is the same. We are always becoming more something, always becoming more something. And it's not just weeks and months, it's decades that can pass. And suddenly you realize, crikey, I've been doing that for a long time. Did I choose it? And so spirituality, and what I talk about in the book, is actually practicing your spirituality means actually perhaps even taking one pillar, forgiveness today, patience tomorrow, gratitude the next day, whatever it might be. And choosing today, it's gratitude. Okay, I'm going to actually proactively, consciously practice that gratitude or forgiveness or whatever it might be. So it is actually building more of that muscle and actually becoming it more. But it does mean a very conscious effort to do it as you go about payroll, whatever it might be.
I remember, it could be about 30 years ago, sitting in the office of a business mentor I had at the time. And he said something to me that always stuck. He said, well, whatever you want more of, Paul, you have to pay more attention to. He said, so if you want more business, you have to pay more attention to that. If you want better relationship with your wife, you will need to pay attention to that. If you want to look after your kids, you will need to pay attention to that. And I remember saying, and if you want more peace of mind, you will have to pay attention to that. And maybe that's where the practice or the conscious awareness comes into it, because I think none of these things, our health doesn't manifest. But maybe for a certain period of our life it does. But mostly we have to take care of all these things in our life. I suppose when I spoke about that time at 17 years of age and having that experience, that was like an overall body experience that I could describe mentally, physically, emotionally. I just felt, I'm going to say the word bliss, but I just felt really good. I just felt like I was in a beautiful state overall. And it became my measurement point. In other words, I'm always moving back towards that point. So it's how I, even 40 years later, it's how I judge almost everything in the recognition of what that point is. So if I'm too busy and I feel stressed, but I can almost visually see that I've begun to drift away by 25% or whatever. And, I will withdraw then and go, okay, I did it this morning. I was busy. I wanted to go up and get into something. And I said, yeah, but you have that sense of disconnect, Paul, don't you? And I said, yeah, but it's not a big deal. I said, do you have it? You do. Okay. And I went over, I meditate for 15 minutes or something. But to me, it's like turning a dial. If you remember the old radios in the
Yeah.
cars and they would, to me, it's like just turning that dial and to go, ding, or I'm back in that place. And knowing that if I return to that place, whatever I'm doing, it will be done better.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of use the phrase paying attention very flippantly, but we are spending our attention, spending our time, or else it's being stolen from us, spending our energy. Our energy will go towards whatever we're paying attention to, but it can be stolen as well. And so I'm actually really interested in that whole discussion around attention, because again, it is so much of our lives. Huge majority of our lives can be done in autopilot. And some of that's good, hopefully. Some of it's, getting us where we want to go. Some of it's, and the values, etc. Some of it's bad, perhaps. And lots of it's probably just kind of neutral. But it's not intentional. And I do think we need to, so when you talk about that kind of, you had to very consciously go and it's a discipline. You really often don't feel like.
Well, I can feel it in my body, and that's the barometer.
Yeah. But you were tuned in enough to know that a lot of people, and including myself on a busy day, would just feel like, oh, I don't have the time, or whatever it might be, and you're in and when you're in one mood, it feels very much the opposite mood to go and sit. And sometimes actually, so I'd suggest actually just stand, even if you're waiting for the kettle to boil, just grab the couple of minutes, just what you don't have to go onto a mat or anything like that. So I'd say that to people as well. To wherever you are, but it attunes you to something different. It sets you up in a different way, and it also, I think, it sets the tone. It colors the rest of the day. I always feel better when I do it. I don't always do it, but I feel, and I call it prayer, but I sit in just complete silence. But to me, that's prayer. I think of my abdomen. Even though I kind of teach mindfulness, I actually don't observe my breath. Actually, for me, I just sit with an image of an inner cave, as it were, and just a deepermost point, and that's what I just stay with. But it's different for everybody. But it does it affect, because I do think it can set you up to spend your attention much more consciously and your energy for the rest of the day. And you mentioned there just earlier, and you mentioned about health. And in the book, I talk about what I kind of coined the term SPINE, SPINE, which stands for Spiritual Psychoneuroendocrinology. Now, we've always had this kind of science of psychoneuroimmunology, which is the science of the study of the interaction between our psychology and our immune and hormonal systems, etc., endocrine systems, etc. But I added to that the S for it, and it is to me the spine. It is our backbone of our day and our lives. It could be, if people prefer the word S to stand for social as opposed to spiritual, whatever people feel more comfortable with. But the basis of it is the fact that all of it is always interacting with each other in both directions. And then outward into the environment as well. So the environment is impacting us, and we are impacting our environment as well. So again, it's this kind of like,
it's fluid and interconnected.
It's an ecosystem in and of itself.
Yeah. You cannot take one piece out.
No, it's a system. It's a system, and it includes our environment as well.
I use the term meditation because what I was first introduced to 40 years ago was meditation, and I don't think the word mindfulness was used at the time. But now everyone seems to use the word mindfulness. Is there a difference?
Well, there are different types. Well, there's different types of approaches in mindfulness, and there are different types of meditations, and then there's contemplation as well. I think I do see as mindfulness is being used for almost everything. And
yes, any form of attention, mindfulness.
Yeah, absolutely. It's thrown out all the time.
As opposed to mindfulness meditation.
Yeah, yes, or kind of like, it's not differentiated from relaxation, for example.
Yes, yeah.
And if you were to do for example, let's say a relaxation exercise and a mindfulness exercise, the difference is really quite big, and that matters. So, for example, I noticed that I remember be sitting in one group and somebody saying that they were going to use a mindfulness approach for childbirth. I personally, having used self-hypnosis, which is a deep relaxation for childbirth many, many years ago, but I would recommend that over mindfulness. Mindfulness is paying attention very consciously. You are very much in the moment. There's different forms of attention. You can be paying attention to your breath. You can be attention to the thoughts passing through your mind, the sensations, the touch of your chair, your feet on the ground, etc. You can be, in other words, you're kind of, if you think of it a bit like a torch that you're actually pointing in a particular direction, or you can kind of, a bit like those torches here, there's kind of camping torches or whatever. There's very strong beam, or there's you twist it a different way and it goes out much wider. And I kind of think, so there's also that kind of attention, which is it's a gentler attention. It's more expansive, and it's just not hoping that something will come into your attention, but just being there, observing things as they pass. So there's different ways of doing kind of even a mindfulness a meditation, but they are mindful. In other words, you're conscious, you're kind of awake, you're in the moment, and you are, you're fully in the present, as they call it. But say a relaxation exercise is different in that you could be just paying attention to your breath or something. But if you want to go into a much deeper a relaxation, you might be doing something, dissociating or thinking about going stairway down to something, or your favorite beach, or it might be your holiday and sensing the smells. But in other words, you're dissociating. You're not associating to with the chair that you're in. You're allowing your imagination to take you out of. And so, for example, in pain and things like that, it can be useful. Sometimes I'll use mindfulness, and sometimes I'll use a kind of a relaxation, detached kind of approach. So there's different ways of using attention. And it's a bit like our 5-a-day type thing that you need. There's different modes of attention. And if you're using one the whole time, that's not useful. So, for example, kind of your productivity mode of mind might be great at work. But if you bring that back home to, for example, the kids, and suddenly it's kind of like in efficiency mode, and they're supposed to have dinner now and then get out the door and that's not family life. You're not going to get the results you want. So it's a different mode of attention for different parts of your day.
Yeah, I remember when the kids were young, I'd come home from a very busy day and my wife would say, "We don't work for you."
Well done.
Tell me very clearly, yes. Yeah. You can leave the CEO cap in the car, my dear. You're not going to hit the house. But that's, from my point of view, that's lack of awareness. That's me being almost, mindlessly in a mode, parking my car and just continuing in the mode without taking a moment of consciousness to go, I needed to be, when I was in the office, in this modus operandi. Now, as I engage with my family, I need to operate. I don't need to be someone different, but I just need to notice the shift. Yeah. And that's, I think that awareness is really important, because we missed, well, certainly I would have missed
Absolutely.
that.
And I think, we don't even use the word mindfulness at all, but just to become aware of how are you? If you don't mind, I had just a quick story. I remember years and years ago, I was working in a hospital with patients with very severe irritable bowel syndrome. And one woman came in to me, and she'd just been downstairs at the clinic, and she came through the door and burst into tears. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "I've waited months for that appointment downstairs. We'd done all the things, and I'd practiced, I'd written out what I wanted to say to make sure that I used the time well and all of that kind of stuff, and what I wanted to ask. I came into the appointment. I literally had barely sat down in the chair," she said, and the doctor just kind of said, "Oh, that's not working. Okay, fine. Here's your prescription for the next drug." And I was back out the door. And she was so frustrated. And she said she just felt completely unheard and unlistened to, because the suffering that was these people experienced between sessions is awful. So we went down to the doctor, and the doctor apologized profusely. And he said, "I am so sorry, but the patient before you had just kind of effed and blinded at me and was so abusive to me. It just threw me, and I just went back into autopilot." And he
Yeah.
knew what drug to change for this woman to go next. He just forgot to actually listen to her. He just went into autopilot. That's what mindfulness is about. You don't need to use the words. It's just becoming aware. Like if I've had bad traffic on the way to a meeting, am I also still in a narc when I get to that meeting?
Yeah.
That's what it's about.
Yeah, I think if you're paying attention, you will notice these things. They're natural. If anyone comes in and effing blinds at you, it's natural. But maybe, I mean, Deepak Chopra used to, and we still used to use that expression of the gap. And it's just that moment of what it's me entering my home and going, okay, just that awareness. I need to operate differently. I don't know. There's a wonderful book. I don't know if you ever read this book. You probably have. But can you see it? Altered Traits.
No, I haven't.
Oh my God. Altered Traits. The science reveals how meditation changes your mind, brain, and body, with Daniel Goleman and Richard J. Davidson. And it's a study of meditation, because both of them are lifelong. I could call them Buddhist meditators, but I suppose a lot of mindfulness and John Kabat-Zinn work and that sort of stuff comes from. So it's not in religious, but it's practice. So they're lifelong components of this, and they're also scientists, and they did lots of study, literally proving the impact of mindfulness and meditation. And one that stuck in mind as a very practical level was where they brought these people in, and they had some meditators and non-meditators, and they showed them unpleasant images, and they showed them images of like workplace accidents and these sort of things, and they measured how we responded. And of course, all the people responded when they saw someone getting their hand cut off. So all the people responded. But they noticed two things between the meditators and the non-meditators, in that everyone reacted, but the non-meditators reacted to a much more extreme level than the meditators. So they had less of a reaction to it. And the non-meditators stayed out of sync for a lot longer, and the meditators returned to balance. So it was a wonderful practical example of proving that it actually is rewiring your brain to deal with both trauma but day-to-day struggles differently. But the interesting final piece to it is they then took some of those people and took them through a 6 weeks mindfulness course. They didn't send them off to be monks. They put them through 6 weeks of this and put them through the same test, and the change was significant. So demonstrate two things very clearly and scientifically: that it makes a big difference in your brain, and that you can have a very quick impact on it.
What we do, we become, and that can sound maybe a bit woo or something like that, but it is literally, as I say, that is why athletes repeat something and practice something over and over and over again, because you are literally changing the brain, the wiring relevant to that particular thing. So we're always training our brain in some shape or form, whether we are even choosing to do it in a particular way or not. We're always choosing to do it. And that, I think, but that is also, you mentioned those studies in mindfulness. I think that was why it finally came from being woo or considered alternative to mainstream, because it got the kind of gold standard control, millions of gold standard controlled studies in terms of mindfulness, properly carried out assessments and that kind of thing. And they also found that they were more people trained in mindfulness are more autonomous, so they're less likely to kind of go with the group thinking, or they're better able to stay independent and aware of their thinking. That's what it really is. It's aware of their thinking. And am I being swayed by somebody who's louder or power or the group or safety or whatever my own concerns are? Am I being swayed by that? You're just more aware of your own thinking.
If I was considering the direct questions to why I would want an entrepreneur, or why I would want anyone, but if I'm specifically targeting towards an entrepreneurial audience, why I would want them to pursue some sort of meditative practice. And I acknowledge that could be a practice of prayer, because I think that will rewire your brain in the exact same way. But some sort of quiet, why I would encourage it, is because I've been in business for 40 years, and over 40 years, what you do in life, but in business, is you move from one challenge to the next. And you become successful based on your ability to resolve those challenges constructively. And the practice of meditation over the years, what it's allowed me to do was to be calm in dealing with those situations. Situation arise and you go, calm. You may be worked up over something, but you take a moment of calm and you settle and then decide, okay, what's the best way to react to this? And you react to that. Now, if you compound that over the decades, you just have the odds of making much better decisions over a long period of time. So I would encourage anyone simply just to put them in that situation where you won't fly off the handle, because when you fly off the handle, you tend to make stupid, destructive, damaging decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing to say to people though is, unfortunately, it's really hard to do. When you need it most is the hardest time to do it, because you're not in that zone, as it were, for want of a better word.
It must be the habit.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of, when you're not, the last thing you want to be doing is you're all animated and charged and energized, whatever, and you're, and so the last thing you might be able to do is to kind of sit mindfully, or if you're having the time, whatever it might be. So even if you could do something as simple as going from either, maybe if you're looking at a cluttered desk like mine, or to a busy office or whatever it might be, to a more expansive sky, looking out the window. If you can go out to your, if you have a balcony, if you have a garden, whatever it might be, something that's a little bit more expansive, because we do know nature really calms us down. But a cluttered environment clutters the mind even more, and it kind of more expansive because it's less busy when you look to the sky. It's visually less busy. It de-stresses the brain a little bit and might just bring you down just a little bit. Because I think sometimes sitting in meditation is a really big ask for people when you're trying to say, how do I pay this week's bills? So anything that is just, or a conversation with somebody, or even a kind of like go down the corridor to the coffee desk or whatever it might be. And in the meantime, you might meet somebody, say hi, and you instantly pulled out of your inner thinking and your rage or whatever it might be and worry out to somebody else. And that will just help you a little bit, especially if it puts a smile on your face. It'll just bring you down a little bit. Sometimes meditation is a big ask.
I agree. It's a very big ask. And certainly in that moment of stress, I found it enormously useful at those times. But I've a very long practice behind me. It's the first thing, but I still find it enormously challenging. So I'm not suggesting that I now float into those. Absolutely not. I just have a couple of threads that allow me.
You've seen the benefits. So it's easier.
But I've something to hang on to, which doesn't mean it's not enormously difficult. Do you see any? I mean, obviously you speak about this, you teach it, you've written books, you're writing a new book. Do you see traction? Do you see any shift towards more people becoming aware of the value of this and adopting it?
It's slow progress is my honest answer in terms of, do you know something? It is just below the surface. Without question, it's increasing, without question. But now I'm working more and more with chronic pain patients, actually. But a lot of my main work is corporate kind of stuff. And they are very slow and nervous to adopt it. Even though lots of people will come and ask me afterwards, what's your book about? Or, how do I get your book? Or, I love what you said about such and such, whatever. So I'm careful and respectful of because obviously the people that are bringing me in, they need to feel safe as well, that I'm not going to go off on some tangent that they're going to be sued for or something like that. So I need to be, I have to be respectful of that as well. So I do find that people are still quite shy about it. Is it growing? Absolutely. In terms of speaking public about it, it's definitely growing. Is it a need? And is it already there? Absolutely. Absolutely, it's there. It is a millimeter below the surface for most people.
We agree entirely.
A millimeter, and people really want to talk about it, but are still kind of embarrassed to do so. I just don't feel we've got the language to be able to bring it in. Like, in America, if you go to business speakers like you with Tony Robbins, but lots of very mainstream business speakers will throw out a comment like, because we're mind, body, and spirit. In Ireland, we'd never do that. We'd never say spirit, really. And that has still got to come. That maturity has still got to come.
And yet, I think if you ask most Irish people, they would feel that we are a spiritual
Absolutely.
people. When you say it's just below the surface, that would be my experience. I think with almost everyone you meet, it's just been below the surface. They don't bring their attention to it, but they probably, this is what you've referred to all through this, they probably don't have the language to describe it without. A lot of people now are not comfortable with a religious context, and they don't have the language to describe it outside of that.
Yeah, but I think a lot of people are highly aware of it. If you even just use the word spirituality.
Yeah.
When I say that I think it's just below the surface, what I mean is that it's just the surface being where they feel free to say anything about it in everyday language, at workplace, in everyday things, which I think is that's why I called it the 7-day soul, not about the yoga mat or the mass or whatever.
Agree.
It's about every day. And so I think people are highly aware of it, really want to kind of scratch that itch, for want of a better word, to speak about it, to speak about their needs and their passions and that sense of something that we find hard to describe. But they're just still in, there's the surface is the embarrassment line or the shyness line because it doesn't feel acceptable yet.
When I picked the book up first, that's what it appealed to me, was this notion that spirituality is just who we are, and it's how we live all of our lives. And we need to move away from this idea that it's, from a Catholic perspective anyway, that it's an hour on a Sunday morning and then you go back to the rest of your life, because that's empty. And in the absence of that, in a culture where a lot of people aren't going to the church on a Sunday morning, they can live it all of their lives, which I think is, it's a wonderful direction or choice to give people. What's the new book about, or would you rather not say it?
Not allowed to say just yet. It is more on that, expanding it though, bringing it into, again, bringing it mainstream. That's that's what I'm passionate about, and part of health, as I did in the 7-day soul as well. That it is just part of it, and kind of, I would say, an equal part of it. Where it's below everything else, but I'm not allowed to say just yet.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I look forward to reading it, and hopefully when it is out and you can't speak about it, you can come back on the podcast and we can have another great conversation. Susanna, it's been a pleasure having you in the show. It's been a very enjoyable conversation for me
too.
And I hope we've opened the idea to some people that spirituality is how they live every moment of their life.
You're here. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Loved the conversation. Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
For me too. Thanks.